John Stands in Timber was a revered Northern Cheyenne elder, historian, and storyteller, deeply committed to preserving the rich heritage of his people. Born on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, he grew up immersed in the oral traditions of his ancestors, listening to the accounts of his elders, among them his grandfather, a survivor of the legendary Battle of the Little Bighorn. Determined to ensure that these invaluable stories were not lost to time, he dedicated his life to sharing and safeguarding the history of his people. Through his collaborations with historians and anthropologists, John Stands in Timber provided profound insights into the Northern Cheyenne's past, contributing to the written documentation of their history and cultural legacy. His work remains indispensable in understanding the experiences and perspectives of the Northern Cheyenne, particularly during the turbulent late 19th century. Before we delve into the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. The Gathering Storm, prelude to the Battle of the Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876, when General George Armstrong Custer and his men clashed with the Cheyenne and Lakota warriors. The battle did not unfold as an ambush, as some accounts suggest. The native warriors were well aware of the soldiers' presence in the region and anticipated a confrontation. They simply did not know when it would occur. My grandfather, Lame White Man, had warned my grandmother the day before the battle that scouts had spotted U.S. cavalry forces along the Rosebud River. When they ventured further downriver, they observed a steamboat that had recently transported supplies along the Yellowstone. Meanwhile, the people of White Man Bear were making their way toward the Black Hills when they encountered the soldiers. Rather than turning back, they pressed forward, meeting other scouts who relayed crucial intelligence. Word quickly spread, prompting warriors from various bands to converge at the Little Bighorn. However, the U.S. Army was not operating in the dark either. A Crow scout known as White Man Runs Him had been closely monitoring the Cheyenne movements and reported to Custer daily. Thus, both sides were well aware of each other's whereabouts. The Council of War, after the primary encampment, was established along the Little Bighorn River. The Lakota and Cheyenne leaders convened a council to determine their course of action should the soldiers arrive. Their decision was clear. They would not provoke a fight, but would attempt to parley with the military if they approached in peace. Perhaps they want something other than forcing us back to the reservations, the elders speculated. We will listen to them, but if they come to fight, we will meet them with equal resolve. Be prepared to maintain order and prevent reckless engagements. The military societies of the Lakota and Cheyenne were tasked with guarding the camp. Their duty was to prevent impulsive young warriors from charging into battle prematurely. Traditionally, it was an esteemed honor for a warrior to engage the enemy first, but in this instance, discipline was paramount. That evening, warriors assembled at their designated posts, taking up positions along the riverbanks and surrounding hills, forming a vigilant perimeter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their silhouettes could be seen patrolling the ridges, a silent but unmistakable testament to their readiness. The defiant few, despite the vigilance of the camp guards, some young warriors, driven by an irrepressible thirst for battle, sought to bypass their restrictions. My step-grandfather's friend, Bigfoot, approached him that night. "Wolf Tooth," he urged, "we can slip away unnoticed. Others might do the same. We'll meet the enemy near the Rosebud." The two observed the patrols, studying their movements. One group had crossed to the eastern side of the river. Another took up position between what would later be known as the Reno and Custer battlefields, while many others patrolled the high hills near Medicine Tail Creek. As darkness settled over the land, Wolf Tooth and his comrades carefully executed their plan. Under the guise of securing their horses for the night, they led them to a secluded spot on the western side of the river, pretending to leave them for morning use. Once night fully took hold, they stealthily retrieved their mounts and made their way toward the riverbank. As they approached the water's edge, a sudden noise, a rush of horses crossing the river, froze them in their tracks. Fearing discovery, they remained hidden in the tall rushes, listening. When the sound faded, they proceeded cautiously, slipping into the river with deliberate, measured movements to avoid splashing. Upon reaching the opposite bank, They concealed themselves among the reeds, lying in wait for the battle to come. The dance of the warriors, meanwhile, a different kind of intensity stirred within the camp. That night, several young Lakota warriors declared their intent to take the suicide vow, a solemn oath to fight until death in the impending battle. This sacred ritual, first practiced by the Cheyenne and later adopted by the Lakota as the dying dance, marked an unbreakable commitment to ultimate sacrifice. The announcement sent ripples of emotion through the encampment. Spotted Elk and Crooked Nose, both present that night, recounted how the entire community gathered to witness the vow. As the warriors stepped forward, the drumming and chanting swelled, filling the air with an electrifying energy. "We never counted exactly how many took the vow," Spotted Elk later recalled, "but it was fewer than 20. Among them were the Cheyenne warriors Little Whirlwind, Cut Belly, Closed Hand, and Noisy Walking, each destined to perish the following day." The next morning, as per tradition, the camp held a grand procession to honor the vowed warriors. Led by elders who proclaimed their valor, the young men paraded through the village to the sound of solemn chants. "Look at these boys," the elders declared. "They will not return after the next battle." The weight of their sacrifice hung heavily in the air, though no one knew for certain if that day would bring war. The attack begins. During the procession, 3 young boys, unaware of the brewing storm, had wandered off to swim in the river. As they played in the water, they suddenly heard shouting, war cries, and gunfire echoing through the valley. "The camp is under attack," someone screamed. Panic erupted. The boys scrambled from the water, sprinting back to their families. In the chaos, one of them, Yellow Robe, attempted to mount his prized horse, only to find it had broken free in the commotion. Desperate, he seized a half-broken colt, which reared wildly beneath him. Barely able to control the animal, he clung to its back as it charged through the camp, nearly trampling others in its path. Meanwhile, my grandmother, twin woman, recalled witnessing the attack unfold. That morning, my grandfather, Lame White Man, had been participating in a sweat lodge ceremony when the warning cries reached them. Emerging from the steamy enclosure, he and the others rushed to aid their families. Above the village, dust rose in thick clouds as soldiers poured into the valley. Across the river, more troops emerged, closing in. The warriors of the camp, Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho alike, hurriedly armed themselves, rallying to meet their foe. The Battle of the Little Bighorn had begun. The battle unfolds. The role of Lame White Man and the Cheyenne warriors' Lame White Man had no time to don his war regalia. Only a blanket, moccasins, a belt, and a gun. He moved swiftly with my grandmother to the west, past a series of small hills, before descending and crossing the river behind the advancing warriors. Earlier that morning, Wolftooth and Bigfoot had emerged from the brush at first light. As dawn broke, they spotted Indian patrols on the surrounding ridges, prompting them to wait in concealment. Moving cautiously along the terrain, they soon joined a larger group of warriors. By then, nearly 50 men had successfully slipped through the lines and crossed the river. They regrouped beneath a wooded hill just north of what is now Highway 212, when a distant shout caught their attention. Looking down toward the ridge nearly a mile below, they saw a lone rider waving his arms and calling out urgently. Recognizing him as a fellow warrior, Wolftooth and his men turned their horses and galloped back toward him. As they drew near, the rider, speaking in Lakota, relayed alarming news. Bigfoot, who understood, Lakota, translated the message. The first skirmish. The soldiers advanced. The soldiers had already begun their descent toward the village, their approach marked by rising dust clouds. Reacting swiftly, the Cheyenne warriors hastily made their way back up the creek, taking a route that led to the ridges above. Upon reaching the crest, they saw the last of Custer's men disappearing from sight as they moved toward the river. Unbeknownst to them, Major Reno's forces had already attacked the opposite end of the encampment. As the soldiers disappeared into the valley, Wolftooth's band split into 2 groups, one trailing the troops, the other maneuvering around to intercept them. They closed in on a detachment, still making its way down the slope, encircling them from both sides. The soldiers opened fire, their gunshots echoing across the hills. Thus began the first skirmish of the battle. However, the warriors did not engage at close range, choosing instead to harass the enemy from a distance, using their superior knowledge of the landscape to their advantage. Following an exchange of gunfire, the Cheyenne warriors withdrew back into the hills as the soldiers pressed forward, crossing the southern end of the ridge where the Custer Battlefield National Monument now stands. From there, the troops moved cautiously down toward what is today the cemetery site. Then, 40 to 50 warriors emerged near the monument, launching another volley of gunfire. Despite this, the soldiers continued their march toward the river, positioning themselves opposite the Cheyenne encampment. Some warriors had already crossed to the other side, firing from the cover of thick brush along the riverbank. This unexpected attack forced Custer's men to veer northward, but instead of advancing further, they hesitated and regrouped near the cemetery site, where they lingered for more than 20 minutes. Among the Cheyenne, it became a running joke that Custer had been preoccupied with something other than battle. Beaver Heart, a Cheyenne warrior, later recounted a story in which Custer, upon hearing reports of the large Indian village, supposedly laughed and boasted, "When we reach that village, I'll find the Sioux girl with the most elk teeth on her dress and take her along." The Cheyenne and Lakota often remarked that Custer's arrogance blinded him to the reality of the situation. He had vastly underestimated the strength and resolve of the warriors he was about to face. Closing the trap, the Cheyenne and Lakota converge. Among the warriors firing from the river bottom was Hanging Wolf. He recalled that they managed to strike one of the soldiers' horses, throwing its rider to the ground. However, the surviving troops quickly retrieved their fallen comrade and retreated northward. Meanwhile, more Cheyenne and Lakota reinforcements continued crossing the river, steadily tightening the noose around Custer's men. Hanging Wolf later speculated that had the soldiers immediately attempted to retreat along the river toward Major Reno's position, they might have stood a chance of survival. However, by delaying, they gave the warriors enough time to cut off all escape routes. While this was unfolding, Wolf Tooth and his warriors maneuvered along the ridges, positioning themselves above the soldiers. By the time Custer led his men into the basin below the monument, the Gray Horse Company had dismounted and was advancing on foot. If there had been fewer warriors on the ridge above, the soldiers might have been able to break through and reach Reno's forces. However, with warriors now pressing from multiple directions, the soldiers found themselves pinned down. Most of the Cheyenne warriors had gathered at Custer's position, while the Sioux fighters engaged Reno's troops further north. Beaver Heart recalled how Reno's men had initially pushed close to the village, but were eventually forced into a desperate retreat. Attempting to escape, they galloped along the riverbank before crossing at a hazardous ford. The opposite bank was steep and slick, made worse by the panic of retreating horses. Many soldiers were cut down as they struggled to climb the embankment. Those who survived finally made it to what is now known as Reno Hill, where they made their stand, battered, exhausted, and barely holding on. The final charge. The suicide warriors as Custer's men faced mounting pressure. The air was suddenly filled with cries in Lakota. Sioux criers rode along the battle lines, calling out to the warriors in their native tongue, "Get ready. Watch for the suicide boys." These warriors, who had vowed to fight until death, were preparing for their final charge. The plan was to attack from the river while the warriors stationed above would simultaneously close in, leaving the soldiers no room to maneuver. The intent was clear. The moment the suicide boys engaged the enemy, the warriors above would surge forward, ensuring that the soldiers had no time to aim their rifles. Most Cheyenne fighters did not initially understand the Sioux criers, but those who did quickly translated the message. Moments later, the suicide boys, the last warriors to enter the fight, charged forward. Galloping onto the plateau near where the little Bighorn Battlefield Museum now stands, some warriors drove off the soldiers' gray horses, scattering them. Others charged directly into the ranks of Custer's men, engaging in ferocious hand-to-hand combat. The Suicide Boys fulfilled their oath. Every one of them was either killed or mortally wounded in the assault. As the soldiers turned to fire upon them, Wolftooth's men swept in from behind. Caught in the relentless attack, Custer's forces crumbled. Some soldiers attempted to flee toward the ridge line, scattering in various directions, but none made it far. They were swiftly cut down. The end of the battle, a chaotic massacre in the aftermath. The battlefield was a chaotic and grisly sight. The bodies of men and horses lay entangled, making it impossible to distinguish one from the other. Riderless horses ran wildly, trampling fallen soldiers and warriors alike. A Sioux warrior, Stinking Bear, recounted witnessing an Indian fighter charge a soldier who, out of desperation, swung his rifle like a club, knocking his attacker to the ground. Nearby, Yellow Nose, a Cheyenne warrior, saw two Indian horses collide mid-charge, sending their riders tumbling. Narrowly avoiding them, he spotted something fluttering in the dust: the American flag. The banner stood alone in the sagebrush, abandoned. Grasping the flag, Yellow Nose rode directly into the fray, using it to count coup on a soldier, a moment that later became legendary among the Cheyenne. Had it not been for the Suicide Boys' charge, some believe the battle could have turned out differently. Unlike Reno's skirmish, where the soldiers maintained their distance, the fight with Custer became a brutal, close-quarters engagement, sealing their fate. That be why the time the gunfire ceased, not a single man under Custer's command remained alive. Custer's fate and the legacy of the battle among the Cheyennes. One persistent point of discussion was whether Custer might have escaped had he continued his advance rather than halting on the ridge. Some believed that if he had pressed forward, he might have linked up with Reno's forces and survived. However, Custer likely thought he could hold his ground and secure victory. The mystery surrounding who fired the shot that killed Custer has long fascinated historians and warriors alike. Over the years, I have translated for many people asking this very question, but no one has ever confirmed witnessing a specific individual fire the fatal shot. The reality is that amidst the chaos, with bullets whizzing in every direction, it was impossible to determine exactly whose shot struck a given man. Some rumors suggested that certain individuals knew the truth but remained silent, either out of respect or fear of repercussions. As Spotted Blackbird once said, if we could have seen where every bullet landed, we might know. But on that day, hundreds of bullets were in the air. Over time, various legends have emerged. One recounting a Sioux victory dance in which Custer's severed head was allegedly displayed on a pole. However, another version of events suggests that his body was never scalped at all. Regardless of the truth, the details have been lost to time, and those who might have known have long since passed on. The death of Lame White Man and the Cheyenne fallen after the battle. My grandmother's brother, Tall Bull, crossed the field and solemnly said, "Prepare a travois. One of the dead is my brother-in-law. We must bring his body back." That man was my grandfather, Lame White Man. They found him as he had fallen, without his war clothes, as he had never had time to put them on. Tragically, some Sioux warriors, mistaking him for one of Custer's Indian scouts, had taken his scalp. Not far from his body lay another fallen Cheyenne warrior, Noisy Walking. These two were the only Cheyenne fighters whose locations were later marked where they fell. Lame White Man was the oldest Cheyenne warrior killed in the battle, and the only Cheyenne chief to fall that day. According to what I heard, the Sioux suffered 66 casualties, while the Cheyenne lost only 7, though there may have been more. Unlike the soldiers, whose bodies were left behind, the warriors removed their fallen from the battlefield immediately. Some had died in the thick of the fighting, while others succumbed to their wounds in the hours or days that followed. Among those who died were Lame White Man Noisy Walking, son of White Bull, Ice, Roman Nose, son of Long Roach Whirlwind, son of Black Crane Limberbones, Cut Belly, Closed Hand, 4 of them. Noisy Walking, Cut Belly, Closed Hand, and Whirlwind had been part of the Suicide Boys, the warriors who had vowed to fight too. The death. The Cheyenne dead were buried across the river, near what is now the railroad tracks. Some accounts suggest that those who died later were taken further east, near the forks of Reno Creek. Years later, we searched the area and discovered an old burial site where hides and deer hair pillows had been placed alongside the remains. It seemed large enough to hold multiple bodies. At some point, someone had disturbed the grave. Rocks had been moved, and human bones lay scattered outside. A marker was eventually erected at the spot where my grandfather fell. It reads, "Lame white man, a Cheyenne leader, fell here." However, in the traditional sense, Lame white man was not a war leader, as Cheyenne chiefs were expected to stay back during battles. But that day, he fought alongside his people. Distorted accounts and the search for truth, the Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg later wrote about my grandfather's death in his book, but he made several errors. He claimed to have recognized the lame white man by his shirt and war bonnet. Yet my grandfather wore neither that day, only a blanket and moccasins. He hadn't even had time to braid his hair, which led to the Sioux mistaking him for a scout and scalping him. Wooden Leg also originally claimed that the soldiers were drunk and had killed themselves, but he later retracted this. When I accompanied 2 Army officers to speak with him, he clarified that the soldiers fought as best they could. They were simply outnumbered. He attributed the high Indian casualties not to drunkenness, but to the sheer number of warriors involved in the battle. After the fighting ended, many Indian warriors returned to the battlefield, collecting their dead and gathering items from fallen soldiers. While most Cheyenne denied any involvement in mutilating the bodies, some believe that warriors whose relatives had been killed at Sand Creek may have sought revenge. They took what they needed: coats, caps, weapons, but left behind the soldiers' pants and shoes, which they had no use for. Legends of lost treasure. Many stories have been told about soldiers' valuables being looted from the battlefield. White Wolf, also known as Shot in the Head, recounted how young warriors gathered silver and paper money from the bodies. 2 men allegedly stashed bags of loot in the crevices of the rock formations near Reno Creek. They rode close to the cliffs, stood on their horses, and pushed the sacks into the gaps. Over the years, many have searched for this so-called buried treasure, but if it was ever found, no one admitted to it. One Cheyenne boy, Wandering Medicine, recalled how he and others found square green paper money and silver coins in the soldiers' pockets. Having no understanding of its value, they used the paper money as saddle blankets for their mud horses and fashioned the silver coins into belt buckles. Many warriors also repurposed military gear. Some made leggings from uniforms, others sewed pouches from boot tops. Wolf Tooth, for example, had a bag crafted from a soldier's boot, which held his pliers and reloading tools for his rifle. When he was buried in the hills, the bag was placed in his grave. Years later, I visited the site, hoping to find it, but someone had already taken it. However, I did find some spent cartridges nearby, preserving the memory of the battle even after the Cheyenne and Sioux were moved to reservations. Many still kept weapons seized from the battlefield. In one famous photograph, White Bull is seen holding a captured soldier's rifle, which he later sold to a trader, after his house burned down. Likewise, Wooden Leg was pictured with a rifle taken during the battle. To this day, many sites on the battlefield remain unmarked from the Indian perspective. Over the years, I have personally marked locations with stones and shared stories to ensure they would not be forgotten. But as time passes, these markers become harder to find. One such site is on Reno's battlefield, where a young Sioux boy was killed while charging the soldiers. Another marks the place where Low Dog and Little Sun killed a soldier trying to escape from Custer's fight toward Reno Hill. The great Indian village broke camp the following day. Some groups moved up toward Lodge Grass, while others remained behind to skirmish briefly with Reno's forces. However, knowing that additional soldiers were approaching, and with their supplies of meat and firewood running low, they did not stay long. The battle was over, but its legacy would endure for generations. The aftermath, celebration, stories, and legacy of the great camp that had gathered for the battle was too vast to remain together for long. In the days following the victory, the people dispersed into smaller groups, traveling along the Little Bighorn River, Reno Creek, and other familiar paths. My grandmother, who was among the Cheyenne warriors heading toward Lodge Grass, later recounted a humorous event from their camp. As part of their celebration, the Cheyenne and Lakota held a mock parade, dressing in captured soldier uniforms and displaying their war spoils. They had even acquired a bugle, which they proudly blew while riding gray cavalry horses, one of which had belonged to my grandmother, a gift from White Elk. The Lakota borrowed the horse for the parade, creating an impressive spectacle. Spotted Hawk also recalled the event, describing how warriors paraded in blue soldier coats and hats, carrying a flag and sounding the bugle, but notably without pants. The parade was held in the morning, followed by a victory dance that night. The next day, the people moved on to resume their way of life, hunting, gathering wild fruits, and preparing for the coming winter. Eyewitness accounts. The battle is told by those who were there over the years. I have listened to the accounts of many men who fought that day. Wolf Tooth, Black Horse, Frank Lightning, Old Bull, and my grandmother, Twin Woman. Each of them had unique experiences and perspectives, and if their stories were all collected, they would fill volumes of books. One of the most vivid storytellers was Hanging Wolf, a warrior who fought in the battle and later became a close friend of mine. His recollections were detailed and filled with the raw intensity of that day. He shared his insights with remarkable honesty, and I always admired his ability to bring the past to life. Through these first-hand accounts, I felt as though I were reliving the battle. The parade and victory dance were just small parts of the larger celebrations that followed, but they offered a glimpse into the spirit of the warriors. Many different men told me their versions of the battle, and if one listened long enough, they would learn an astonishing amount. Each man saw the events unfold from his own perspective, shaped by his personal experience. There were so many stories that, if compiled, they would form an entire library of history. The legend of the famous war horse, one of the most intriguing stories, was shared by Plenty Crows, who later learned that his brothers, Bobtailed Bull and Little Soldier, also known as Fighting Bear, had served as Arikara scouts for Custer during the battle. Years after the fight, Plenty Crows discovered that one of his brothers had been associated with a legendary war horse, a story told from the Indian perspective in contrast to the well-known account of Comanche, the cavalry horse found alive after the battle. This Indian war horse was a large pinto, ridden by an Iroquois scout who had trained it to be exceptionally gentle and loyal. The horse's mother was a travois mare, and from a young age, it had been raised among children, making it especially friendly and obedient. The scout trained the horse to never stray, ensuring that it would always remain nearby when let loose. In camp, the warrior could summon the horse with a special call, and it would come running so that he could quickly mount and ride. During the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Bobtailed Bull rode this faithful pinto into combat. But like his fellow scouts, he was killed. The horse, though struck by 2 bullets, was not mortally wounded. It miraculously escaped the battlefield and, against all odds, made its way back to the Arikara reservation, traveling a great distance alone. Recognizing the horse upon its return, the Arikara honored it by naming it Famous War Horse, and from then on, it became a legend. Plenty Crows was so inspired by his brother's story that he later named 2 of his sons in their honor, and their descendants still carry those names today. The famous war horse remained a symbol of endurance and loyalty, and in its honor, a song was composed, one that would later be sung during victory dances in both world wars, celebrating the return of Native soldiers. Intrigued by this tale, I sought out more information. An Arikara elder provided me with a written statement, saying, "During my lifetime on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota, I can attest that a specific Indian war song was composed for a returned wounded pinto horse, whose master was Scout Sergeant Bobtailed Bull, killed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn." The return to the battlefield by the time additional U.S. soldiers arrived at the battlefield, the Indian forces had already departed. Days later, a Cheyenne warrior named Lost Leg returned to search for stray horses. However, as he approached the battlefield, the overwhelming stench of the dead made it unbearable. Even from a distance, the air was thick with the odor of decay, forcing him to turn back. Though he and his companions had intended to explore the area, They could not endure the sight and smell of the aftermath. Instead, they retreated and soon met up with other Cheyennes traveling toward Reno Creek. That summer saw no further major battles. The great village had broken apart, and the people continued their journey, knowing that the U.S. Army would soon return in greater numbers. Preserving the history of the Great Sioux War, I hope this first-hand account has given you a deeper understanding of the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the broader context of the Great Sioux War of 1876. These stories, told by those who lived them, offer a perspective beyond what is recorded in history books. Stay tuned for more stories from history, as I continue to share first-hand accounts of great battles and events. Until next time, I wish you well, and I look forward to bringing you more insight from those who were there.